Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
Get ready, folks. That's going to be an extraordinary moment. A reform of the left, a new party led by Jeremy Corbyn. Keir Starmer's problems might be getting more complicated. Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guests, gossip, news and stories from our studios at GB News here in the heart of Westminster. This week should have been a cause for celebration for Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister. 1 year since he walked through that door in 10 Downing Street. But guess what? He's not having a party. That's been confirmed by Downing Street. We'll be marking the 1 year anniversary of Labour in this podcast, looking back at what's gone right and what's gone wrong, and a lot has gone wrong for this government over the past 12 months. And I'll be looking at an interesting thought which has emerged this week in Westminster. Are left-wing MPs about to get organised and launch their own version of the Reform UK party on the left of politics? And what does that mean, if it happens, for Labour? But first, at his cabinet meeting this week, Number 10 said that Sir Keir Starmer said this. He reflected on the last year in office, saying we could all rightly look back with a real sense of pride and achievement. He said that was because of tough choices made by his own government, with 3 trade deals, spending review well received by the public, and industrial strategy well received, he said, by businesses large and small. He pointed to a cut in NHS waiting lists, more than 4 million extra appointments, investment in transport, major infrastructure decisions, funding for social and affordable housing, extending free school meals and introducing breakfast clubs. He also said there have been 4 interest rate cuts in a row, and global firms were coming back to Britain, including Amazon, with an investment of £40 billion. The PM said business confidence was at a high, at its highest for some years, he said. And the US trade deal was now implemented for autos and aero. So therefore, it's all going swimmingly, isn't it? Well, maybe not. This is what the pollster Sir John Curtis said. He said Sir Keir Starmer has had the worst start to a time in government of any Prime Minister, Tory or Labour. So for all the talk of the PM's real sense of pride and achievements, voters, it seems, have switched off, perhaps responding to a year of tax hikes on farmers and employers, U-turns on grooming gangs, winter fuel payments to pensioners, and now this week, a complete disaster on its own benefits policy. What on earth has gone wrong? And how did we get here? Now, before I'm joined by Joe Twyman and Tom Harwood, of course, the pollster, and GB News' deputy political editor, I'm joined now by Conor Naismith, who's the Labour MP for Crewe and Nantwich. Conor, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Crewe and Nantwich, of course, is a swing seat. So it tends to go where the government goes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's why you're a Labour MP for that seat. I remember vividly, I was when Gwyneth and Woody died back in the day. I covered the by-election. I think James Timpson won it.
Edward Timpson.
Ed Timpson won it, that's right. Yeah. And one half is quite Tory.
Yes.
And one half is quite Labour.
Yeah. I mean,
Crewe is the Labour bit, Nantwich is the Tory bit from memory.
Historically, that has been the case. I think it's fair to say that we live in kind of volatile political times. And the sands are kind of shifting around us. I mean,
yes.
You know, you're absolutely right to say historically, Nantwich, as part of the constituency, has historically voted Conservative in council elections, etc. And Crewe, you know, very kind of post-industrial railway town, has historically always voted Labour, strong trade union presence, etc. As it stands right now, you know, we're seeing support coming to us in places like Nantwich, affluent kind of liberal type people that are moving towards the Labour Party, and I think it's
fair to reform. Interestingly,
no, not really. But I think it's fair to say a lot of this has been acknowledged that Labour has a real problem on its hands of trying to kind of make sure it maintains that connection with its historic base, and you know we are susceptible to that as much as anywhere else.
Have you found the past year then? I mean, it started, you had the amazing moment of winning that huge landslide. Very excited. And I think that the governments have kind of lost momentum, didn't it, through that summer. The first 100 days, Bill Clinton always says, so important to a new administration. That energy dissipated like water into the sand on the beach, in a sense, because I think they should have had for me, the budget at the end of July would have put the kind of imprint on the government of policy.
I think it's fair to say that obviously the government inherited, we came into government on a very difficult
hurdle, like on a set of
very
circumstances.
But, it is fair to say that I think the government tried to be honest with the country about that. And in doing so, potentially sapped. I think the Prime Minister himself has acknowledged this, that, the speech that he did in the Rose Garden, for example,
in August last year,
potentially kind of sapped some of the hope out of the.
I was there, by the way.
Government.
There was some hope there.
Yeah,
but the hope left the room.
Yeah. And so, look, I think that there's lots of amazing things that this government have done in the relatively short period that we've been in office. I think we do have a claim to say that we are starting to fix some of the problems that the country is facing. But, I'm not blind to the fact that actually the kind of real headline issues that most people are thinking about and talking about are the things that they kind of think that we got wrong. And
Winter fuel, he reversed on that, didn't he?
Yes.
Family farms, that's an issue from the budget. National insurance for employers, that's kind of gone away, but we're seeing an effect maybe with the jobless total rising. That's a worry.
So, government has to take decisions that are not always going to be popular. And that's, maybe we're not used to that in the Labour Party because we haven't been in government for quite a long time. And it's
not easy.
It's quite difficult to kind of shift to that way of thinking. But, look, I think it's fair to say some of those unpopular decisions were the right decisions. I do agree that you can't say that you want to put billions of pounds into our NHS, fix our public services, do all of these things that Labour has a mandate to do from the general election, but not raise any money from anywhere. And so, although the national insurance increase changes and the changes to inheritance tax for farmers, etc., were difficult and popular, have caused some consternation. Anybody that wants to say they don't support those things, but they still support all of the spending that we're doing, has to be able to say how they would fund it instead.
And that question is a question we do ask the Tories and Reform when they come on. Well, how would you do it? It's very easy chucking your bricks on the sidelines. Not easy. I mean, the freebie gate went on for too long. That was hard to manage locally with your new constituents. Was it the freebie issue, the glasses, the spectacles?
I have to say,
I mean, has it gone away now?
I have to say, if I'm being completely honest, that was always a bit of a Westminster issue.
Yeah,
it didn't come up on the doors. I think it's fair to say winter fuel was definitely a major issue for my constituents.
We found that in our intro here at GB News.
Yeah, and of course there have been other things as well, but some of the issues that we tend to focus on quite a lot here are not really the things that.
So who are you looking at? Because we know the PM, we know privately, in fact he said this publicly, he is looking at Reform UK. Those 5 MPs up to his right looking out at the Tory backbenches, those are who he's worrying about, not the Tories. Who do you worry about?
Well, things can change quite quickly. We've seen that, But as it stands right now, I think it's fair to say if there was an election tomorrow, then Reform are the opposition to us in the country. It looks like the next election, the country will be faced with the choice of, do you want a Reform UK government or do you want a Labour government? And there's going to be a big question put to people if that is the case. The Conservative Party look like they are dying. It looks like it is finished as an institution, and that is,
they've been written off before, Connor.
That's a really seismic thing to say. I understand that, and that's why I don't take that for granted, because it's such a historic institution. The most successful political party in the world.
The Whigs disappeared.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. These things are, no political party is owed an existence. It exists because it maintains the support of the public. And that is true of the Conservative Party, it's true of the Labour Party. We should never take that for granted. And I think that it is potentially understated. We don't, the Labour Party obviously talks about it, but the damage that the Conservative Party did to its own brand over that 14 years in government, when I speak to people now, actually, when I try and point out, as Labour MPs do, the record of the previous government, they'll kind of say, yeah, I know that they completely ruined the country, and understandably, they want us to say what we're going to do to fix it.
I'm going to say it to you. The Tories, if they were here, would say they had COVID, they had the energy shock. That's 400 billion. That's 100 billion. That's $500 billion they have to find somewhere, and the tail of that is in tax increases now. But it's fair to you guys, by the way. You're not saying that. You're blaming the Tories, but the Tories, for their part, would say that.
But the the Conservatives try and blame quite a lot on COVID, and one of
whether it's well handled, we'll see how that inquiry lands.
Nobody would argue that COVID was not a generational, a once in a lifetime kind of
let's hope so.
Hopefully, event that any government, regardless Conservative, Labour, whoever it was, they would have struggled to deal with it. I would never question that. But what we are seeing from the Conservative Party now is an attempt to rewrite history about their record. Because, for example, they will tell you that the reason the NHS waiting lists are in such a state is because of COVID. They were at record levels pre-COVID. And yes, COVID exacerbated that. But let's not pretend that was day one.
Call it all about delivery. This week we're seeing the government launching its 10-year NHS programme. I've been to a few of these in my time. I remember one vividly with Theresa May back in 2017 in hospital in Ealing, I think it was. More on that this week. You've got to make the money you've raised through the NICS increase on employers land. I mean, and I think it's coming down now, 4 million more appointments rather than 2 million more appointments. That target of an 18-week wait to see a doctor, that's looking questionable by the end of this parliament, by the next election. Let's wait and see.
Well, look, we've set ourselves really ambitious targets on the NHS. And, you're right to point out, we said in the election we were going to deliver 2 million extra appointments.
Now it's 4.
That's 4. So we are surpassing those targets in some areas. In my own area, so talking about waiting lists at my local hospital trust are down 7%. Since the general election compared to a 3% drop nationally. So we are actually outperforming the national average, which is already pretty good, by the way. Waiting lists are at the lowest levels in 2 years. So a really good start on the NHS. I think that I'm really looking forward to seeing the 10-year plan. And I think fundamentally, voters know that they can trust a Labour government on the NHS.
Yes.
We founded it at the end of the last...
Well, you had the space to do it. I don't think the Tories ever had space to do it. They simply had to convince voters they weren't going to kill it off altogether. That's the place they came from. So did David Cameron in 2006 said that NHS, totally free letters, matter to me. Welfare, though, equally, welfare is a space I think only Labour have a chance to do real reform. And I think you've blown it this week. I do worry about that. I think everyone agrees that there's a problem here, but I think you've got to also be aware that, will you be able to go back and deal with that after this humiliation of the PM this week?
So there is a clear consensus across the Parliamentary Labour Party that welfare reform is needed. But I think what we've seen this week, well, not just this week, in fact, in recent weeks, is colleagues from across the Parliamentary Labour Party saying to the government, we want to work with you on this, but we need to get it right, and we cannot rush it.
So what is getting it right? We know all that. Is it a full root and branch look at the benefit system, report in 2 years, and we'll adopt what's happening? I mean, the Timms review, Stephen Timms, he's looking at PIP, which is a bespoke part of it, but a big, expensive part of it. Why not just do a proper job on it, rather than this raising $5 billion here to cover a black hole in the finances?
Well, I think the reason that the government have chosen to focus on PIP is because since COVID, we've seen this exponential increase in the number of claims. And we need to understand where that is coming from. Why is that happening, particularly amongst young people? And we need to address it. I think the Timms review is really welcome, but particularly, I think we need to see the Timms review co-produced with disabled people. We need to see...
Well, that's happening, isn't it?
It is now, but that was not necessarily...
To me, and others think, well, that means it won't be cut properly, because those correctly, Scope and others will be making the case for people they worry about. But equally, there's other problems in the economy too, which we need to spend money on. We can't always prop up people who can't work. Obviously, those who can't work should get the money, but arguably, in other cases, not.
Well, co-production, I mean, as the name sort of suggests, it will be produced in cooperation. It doesn't mean that any one side of it is going to get entirely their own way. But, we work to this principle of nothing done to us without us. That was in our manifesto, and it's right that the government is going to do that. But the critical point that I kind of centred on yesterday when the vote took place was that review should be concluded and be implemented before we see a kind of arbitrary cut-off for new claimants.
Yes.
Because we need to make sure that we are creating a system that's fair, creating a system that's been co-produced, that also delivers.
And that's why you're a Labour MP. That's why why for this is not, you can't say you're wearing a red tie. You're a Labour MP. I get
my
that.
uniform.
Just finally, what are the lessons here, do you think, for the Prime Minister? I mean, have you met him before?
Yes, I have.
Oh, yes. Some of your colleagues haven't even met him or talked to him in their lives.
So the Prime Minister he wasn't the Prime Minister at the time, but he came to my constituency during the general election campaign.
I may have been there, actually. On the
You may have been, yes, Crewe Alexandra football ground.
Yes. Was it?
Were you all there? Right, great. Well, you're all welcome to Crewe.
I'd love to go again because he launched the manifesto that day.
Yeah.
We then drove to Crewe Alexandra. We interviewed him in the bus, and actually I asked him the question in the bus. Everyone had been chuckling in the audience when he said in a Sky News interview with an audience about being a son of a toolmaker. And he gave an amazing response. He said, "I'm sick of people mocking my dad. That's why I get upset about it." And he really went on with that about his dad. It was really moving. He finally gave a response, I think, which got to the heart of Keir Starmer. But that was my Crewe Alexandra story. But
yeah, no, look, that was a great day. I've met Keir since being in Parliament. You know, obviously, let's be honest. The Prime Minister is a busy man, right? And
he should meet you all. You guys are important,
of course. And it's not to say that there is no lessons to be learned here. I think the relations between the government and its backbench MPs, what this episode has demonstrated is that we have a parliamentary system. We don't have a presidential system. The government of the day needs to be able to carry through its backbench MPs on what it is trying to do. We all want to support the government. We want to do that. But there has to be a dialogue and a conversation to get us into a place where we're able to do that. We will work in good faith with the government. I am committed to doing that. But we need to see better communication.
It's not all over, is it? We heard from Graham Stringer. He's told GB News that he thinks that at some point yesterday, the government may have lost its majority because it wasn't tested by a vote, and it was only brought back into having a majority by the changes announced yesterday in the chamber.
So I'll be completely honest. Prior to those changes, I was not going to support what was.
Because you backed the original amendment, didn't you?
Yes, I signed the reasoned amendments. I recognised that the concessions that the government had made prior to the weekend went a significant way, but it came back to that point about the Timms review and the timing of it. I'd made that point clear. I knew that
So you were going to rebel.
I was not going to support the government at second.
How many of there were you? Do you know that?
I don't know, to be honest. You know, I think it's fair to say the reasoned amendment gave everybody a fair sense of the scale of things. I don't think it was the extent of it because many colleagues were not willing to sign a reasoned amendment, even though they might have rebelled. But yeah, so prior to that, I was not going to support it, and the changes ultimately got me over the line. We need to see those written into the bill prior to third reading,
which is next week.
Yes.
Your best moment of your year as a new MP?
Oh, best moment of the year. I think I'm going to say the count. Really, I mean, that's going to sound ridiculous, but it was
hard work.
It was all and kind of. Each one of those votes is a vote of confidence and trust in me as a member of Parliament.
It's emotional for you. I mean,
and I take that responsibility very, very seriously. That's partly why, when issues of great significance come along,
they matter.
I think it is my duty to speak up for every single one of those people.
And that's who you think of when you vote.
Yes,
as you should say. And your worst moment? Contemplating rebelling this weekend, possibly.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. I mean, I think. As I say, as members of Parliament, we all want to support a Labour government. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm having to contemplate not doing that, especially at the last minute, in the way that kind of played out yesterday.
Conor Naismith, Labour MP for Crewe and Nantwich, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Great to have you here. Thank you. With me now on Chopper's Political Podcast are the best in the business pollster, Joe Twyman from Delta Poll, and Tom Harwood for GB News' Deputy Political Editor. Tom and Joe, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Good morning.
There we are. I've got through that hurried summary of the past year. But let's go back to July last year. It all started so well, didn't it, Joe? He was riding high in the polls.
Well, he did very well in the election and delivered a massive majority. And so a lot of the talk was a repeat of 1997. Tony Blair absolutely stormed the polls and then did very well in poll ratings for many months, indeed years after that. And since then, Tony Blair and others in that administration have talked about the fact that perhaps they concentrated too much on the polling. They thought too much about focus groups and headlines in the Daily Mail. And if you're being generous to Keir Starmer, you would say that he has very, very clearly not prioritised polling ratings in this first year. So a massive success there, I think we can say.
Not sure. Tongue in cheek from Joe Twyman there. Blair started his time in office by doing that moment of taking away interest rate decisions from the Treasury to the Monetary Policy Committee. George Osborne has talked how that ground the Tories' face into the dust after that election defeat. That was announced 3 days after that win. This government didn't do much in that July, did they? They announced planning reforms, the winter fuel payment being withdrawn from 10 million pensioners. Tom, they haven't really started as though they want to govern properly with a momentum, have they?
No, it's interesting. They started immediately after the general election by being incredibly dour. You remember the speech in the Downing Street garden with the sort of spinning of the inheritance. Actually, the day after the general election, Rachel Reeves gave a speech from the Treasury saying, "We've opened up the books and it's far, far worse than we could have possibly imagined." And that was setting the tone then for the next few months of just bad news, bad news, bad news. But the election was fought not on bad news. It was fought on one simple word: change. You might want to say hope and change, a bit of evoking the Obama 08 election
so not
strategy.
being the Tories, that's the point.
But that's the thing. It's so interesting that then there's this big switch after the election. And I think perhaps they wanted to recreate the magic of George Osborne in the early coalition years. Now, that's perhaps slightly surprising because George Osborne was famously booed at the Olympic Games in 2012. But crucially, he set in a narrative that the problems of the country were due to the previous government. And people were willing to sort of suck it up because that was the message during the election campaign. But the Labour Party seems to have done a bait and switch from before the election to after the election, saying, look, we can make everything better before the election, and after the election saying, oh, it's so much worse than we thought. We're going to have to make cuts and raise taxes.
Before the election, all about they're going to save money on non-doms, they're going to use the VAT on private schools and use the proceeds of growth. Those are the three ways they're going to find money. Instead, they cut the pensioners. But one of those few universal benefits left, that was removed. I mean, Joe Twyman, how did that poll? That certainly cut through for Tom and me, with our viewers, didn't it, Tom?
Yeah, it was not a universally popular policy by any means. It wasn't actually as unpopular as perhaps it might have seemed. There was some support out there. But it's one of those things that it depends on how you ask the question. And it wasn't that everyone was having their winter fuel removed. It was that it was becoming means tested. Now, the point at which you means test makes it difficult to poll. You can poll in the abstract, but it's one of these things that actually will come down to messaging. And I think the timing of the election is crucial here. It was, of course, for many of us a surprise that it took place in July. And looking back on it, you might think, well, why not May? Why not November? But having it in July and then going into a recess and the summer and then the party conference season, I think meant that really all of the parties, and I include the Conservatives in this as well, were sort of thrown by people going off on holiday, not being able to sign off with various people. And I think a lot of the difficulties that both Conservatives and Labour have had since the election can be attributed to the fact that it took Labour a long time to sort of get into the swing of being in government, and Conservatives to being in opposition.
Tom Howard.
But also, this is a crucial big messaging point when fuel and energy prices have been at the forefront of people's minds since 2022. It is such an evocative issue that people can play again and again and again. And I was listening to a historian recently talking about the 1964 general election, when the Labour shadow foreign secretary actually lost his seat to the Tories, despite the fact that the Tories lost the election. And then there was a by-election created so that this guy could stand and get back into Parliament and become the foreign secretary accountable to Parliament. But he lost that by-election. Why? Largely because the government had announced delaying an uplift to pensions in time for winter, The by-election was just after winter. Pensioners weren't getting their extra money for that, well, one might say winter fuel or heating or whatever. And a safe Labour seat was lost to the Conservatives in that by-election shortly after the 1964 election. And I just wonder how many sort of parallels are we seeing there now?
So they lost their 100 days. So we know the first 100 days is a Clintonian idea, Bill Clinton, the first 100 days. They lost that. And I remember it the moment it was lost. It was at a press conference given by Rachel Reeves in Rolls-Royce in the first week of the election campaign, early May. The Guardian said to Rachel Reeves, will you wait till the OBR have scored your budget before doing a budget? She said yes. That immediately meant there was an 11-week delay in getting the budget out. That meant the budget couldn't happen at the end of July like it should have done.
But she had to say yes because she was so critical of Liz Truss for not having a full OBR report alongside her mini budget. She then fought the election on being Mrs. OBR. We're going to be absolutely subservient to the OBR in every way, shape or form. Arguably, she could have pushed back against the OBR and say, do a more back of the fag packet sort of calculation, do it more quickly. But she's gold-plated the OBR in legislation.
We had the summer of gloom, didn't we? The speech by Keir Starmer in August warning about the problems ahead. I mean, Joe Twymmer, you see it in the polling. It was the new dawn hadn't broken at all. The one that was forecast by Tony Blair in 97 never happened in 2024.
Yeah, and as I say, I think a lot of that can be attributed to messaging, which I think if you're looking at the timing, could very well be to do with the fact that after an election, as we all know, people are exhausted. And then in the summer, as we all know, people aren't around. And the combination of those two things means your first 100 days takes you to party conference season, but there's very little that can actually be really properly.
But politics opposed a vacuum, and into that vacuum fell the freebies.
Exactly.
The freebies from the
exactly. And so when you don't have anything, you don't have anything else to talk about that.
And does that matter? That cut through the suits and the
passes. There will be vanishingly few people who, in 4 years' time, we assume, will be voting based on that, but. In the absence of anything else to talk about, it leads to a situation where at the Labour Party conference, I was asked on air, is this all over for Keir Starmer? I think that's rather...
The surprising thing for me was when you're in power, you control the news. So we rely on reporting what's above the waterline. If it's a iceberg, they see everything. So they could easily pull things out from below the waterline and made us look at that.
Fill the grid.
Fill the grid as the awful thing. Yeah, you're right.
But isn't the most remarkable thing is they hired someone specifically to do this? To plan, I think it was someone by the name of Sue Gray. Supposed to plan for the most smooth transition to government that any party has ever seen.
Life, they've been around there forever, knew how well...
For more than a year, Keir Starmer knew he was going to win the election and win it well. And he hired insiders in order to try and smooth that transition. So the moment that he got into number 10, the moment that famous black door closed behind him, he would be ready to go from the off. The grid, as we hate saying, would be full of news and action. And according to some briefing from clearly some other factions in the Labour Party, those that were in the Labour Party HQ south of the river who were fighting that election, when they finally got into Downing Street and saw the Downing Street preparation team, they almost were saying, sort of, what were you guys doing? There's nothing that's been done. It's that empty.
Joe Tom, is it wrong to blame her? She's a lightning rod for Labour failures, but is it all on her or is it the party?
Well, I simply don't know enough about the machine within Downing Street, but I do think there's an interesting comparison with Donald Trump because regardless of your views of the policies that he has announced, he had Project 2024 ready to go, and flooding the zone was very much the approach.
But he had learned from the failure from 2017.
Exactly. He wasted both. He had learned from the fact that he was not prepared for government. And so this time, the zone was well flooded. And I think if they could go back and do it all again, they would. But there is the question about, as I say, if you try and flood the zone with really big things in August, is anyone in the Westminster Village, or importantly, more widely, paying any attention?
And yet, surely what you should be doing if you're a government is trying to make people feel better off. It's almost as if, I mean, as important as the media is, and as important as the polls on the day are, clearly, the thing that will win or lose this government the next election is, will people feel better off 4 or 5 years' time?
Let's quickly spin through the following months. September felt like a funereal party conference. Didn't feel like a celebration.
Extraordinary.
Let's just park that, but it did reflect what we're talking about.
Conservatives, on the other hand, really excited.
They thought they would be back in government. They were at the time, leading in some polls, which I think is easy we forget.
It'd be different this year.
Yeah, I forgot that too. The budget happened. Big increase in national insurance employers' share of that tax. Again, everyone thought that was a bit questionable because we were told it wouldn't go up, but that was employees, not employers. We now find out the family farm tax. We're seeing the echo of that now with the jobless crisis happening now, with fewer people being employed. Is that linked to national insurance? Did that cut through the budget, the money they raised?
Most people, the average person in the street, and the 50% of people less engaged than the average person in the street, isn't paying attention to the detail of the budget, or indeed any other.
No, why should they?
But instead, they pick up broad narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves and each other about whether the right decisions are being made, whether the government is delivering, whether things are being done fairly. Those are the kind of important questions that people take, not just from the budget itself, but from all the coverage around that. And this was much like George Osborne's budget with Pastygate in 2012. It was a case of most things being forgotten and public opinion being sort of railroaded along the lines of things that were not good for the government, and so overall the perception was actually that probably wouldn't make much difference to individuals and their families, but that overall it wasn't a great
because it was targeted companies away from individuals. That's possibly why. Fast forward to this year, they keep launching the money being spent on the NHS. More news this week, we understand. No to a grooming gangs inquiry, Tom Howard. That's been reversed. Big spending on infrastructure, but mainly in the south. So they kind of claw their way back into having an idea what they were trying to be this early this year, didn't they, Tom? Before the budget,
I think there's a clear difference in just the smooth workings of government before and after Christmas. And I don't want to put everything on Sue Gray. I think Sue Gray is, as you say, a lightning rod that represents a lot more. But clearly, what happened was you got more political people at the heart of Number 10 when Morgan McSweeney took over as chief of staff.
Yep.
I think you started to see some decisions that were actually thinking beyond the Westminster bubble. Now, this is a double-edged sword, as I'm sure we will come on to, but thinking crucially about what your average Brit actually thinks. What were some of those early decisions after Christmas? Cutting foreign aid, increasing spending on the military. Stuff that I'm sure,
exactly the same
and I'm sure it polls incredibly well and goes down well in focus groups. I mean, I remember talking at one point to some senior Conservative organisers about which cabinet ministers to send where. This was when Priti Patel was International Trade Secretary, and some people were saying, "Oh, everyone loves Priti, let's send her there." And the MPs were just like, "No, the one person, the one cabinet secretary we do not want to be sent to this area is the International Development Minister." That goes down incredibly badly on the doorsteps. So I think that they've made some smart political choices, but in doing that, in looking so crucially to the country and the marginal way to win with their broad but shallow coalition of voters. They've forgotten the MPs.
Yeah, we're seeing that this week with the benefits. Joe Tryman.
I think there's also a really interesting point, though, a small one about bad luck as well, and the industrial strategy. This new important document, which was so vital to Labour, and they talked it up so much, and it's one of these things that does well, and yet it's released when there's an international incident that the government has no control over, and so it absolutely disappears. They were expecting front pages, and it won't have made any of them.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you can't always blame bad luck. There's a lot of it is their fault.
Events, dear boy.
Oh, goodness me. I mean, and then we've got the slow growth, sluggish growth. That led to the benefits cuts, which have been reversed here. They seem to be battered by events, Tom Howard, don't they? Reform UK did well in the local elections. US trade on the foreign stage. I've been lucky enough to be with him for GB News on a lot of travelling with the PM. He's done pretty well. 3 trade deals. You're going to mark that? That's
okay. Two trade deals and a trade salvage operation. I mean, the US trade deal is not a comprehensive free trade agreement. It is the reversal. It's the reversal of some tariffs that were put on 2 months beforehand, right? So it's put us back to pretty much where we were, or just slightly less well in terms of our trading relationship than where we were before. Liberalised trade it has not. Yes. But of course, it is better than, for example, the European Union or other countries around the world that face the full whack of those new tariffs.
And it polls well.
And of course, it is that narrative that around the world stage, the Prime Minister is doing things. And he wants to present that sort of, I'm a busy man, I'm shaking hands. And that's the advantage a Prime Minister
Davos.
can have.
He said so, didn't he?
Prefers Davos to Westminster, he says. But perhaps that's coming back to bite him this week, because I've heard today and this week.
Talking on Wednesday morning after
the vote, but I'm sure we will hear it again and again. It's one of the talking points from the government that Tony Blair suffered a rebellion on benefits changes in his first 2 years, in his first year, I think, in government. And around, I think it was 45 Labour MPs rebelled against Tony Blair then, and 49 rebelled against Keir Starmer this week. But here's the difference. Tony Blair passed his benefit reforms, whereas Keir Starmer had to completely go back on his. Now, both face similar spending restraints. Rachel Reeves has her spending rules.
I think
Tony Blair
is better in '98 for the Labour than now.
Well, it was only better because growth was at 4%. That was the inheritance of the major government, and particularly Ken Clarke. Growth is basically at 0 today. So, I mean, actually, in some ways, the borrowing rules are more generous today, particularly for infrastructure. But the growth is so much lower that it feels tighter. Anyway, the comparison is that Tony Blair, who had a similar scale majority, was able to pass difficult and unpopular reform with his backbenchers. Keir Starmer has not been able to pass difficult and unpopular reform with his backbenchers.
Does that matter, being battered by your own MPs in the polls, Joe Twyman?
Parties don't like to look like they're divided. That never goes down.
Voters notice.
That never goes down well with voters. Again, it's these broad narratives. Individually, each one of these events that we're talking about, particularly most recently the benefits, these are talking points. They're not turning points in government fortunes, but collectively they help to inform the way that people think about parties. And so a party that is divided, a party that perhaps doesn't come across as particularly effective, all these things are damaging. What Tony Blair was able to do was use, quite frankly, the force of his popularity to get these things through. Coupled with positive views of the economy, neither of which exist now.
I mean, they were so good, they just squeezed out the Tories. The Tories were completely a marginal force in that first term. I remember vividly that. What do you think voters think the government stands for, Joe Twyman? What is Starmer? Is it anything, or is that a word that we can't even talk about?
I think the term Starmerism is perhaps too strong. Too strong. Thing. I remember majorism was something people were trying to sell in the 90s, and it never really caught on. 7% of people say they don't know whether Keir Starmer's doing a good or a bad job, which is slightly higher than previous prime ministers, but demonstrates that people overall have an idea of whether he's doing well or badly, but there's not really a strong sense of what he stands for. But I think that's very much by design, I would say.
Yes, well, exactly. YouTube, Tom.
And that's what helped Keir Starmer win the election, right? I mean,
by loving the Tories.
By being, as Boris Johnson once said, a bland, boring bollard. I mean, by being that bland, boring bollard, he was not a lightning rod for opposition. Now, he could win on the 33.4% of the vote, I think he won in the general election, because he had a very split opposition. Now, the problem with then becoming Prime Minister and actually doing things is that opposition could coalesce, and suddenly a 33% level in the polls does not look quite as impressive because there isn't quite such split opposition.
Just briefly on that, we're talking shortly in this podcast, Andrew Murray, a former aide at Unite, now works at the Morning Star. All the talk is of a reform of the left, Joe Twyman, starting up. A left-wing party led maybe by Jeremy Corbyn could get 10% of the polls, according to a rival pollster this week. Joe Twyman, your take on that?
Well, could is doing an extraordinarily large amount of heavy lifting in that instance. It's a perfectly valid question to ask. You can ask people, if this party existed, would you vote for it? But the question they answer then is actually, how do I feel about the established parties generally? They project their own hopes and positivity onto those.
So 10% is fool's gold?
As the former pollster for Change UK, I'd be very surprised if it was 10%.
I just find you both, what on earth does Labour do now? We're year one of a 5-year period, 3 more years before the election, before we get into the election campaign. You're shaking your head, Tom Harwood. What would you do if you were Prime Minister? Or how could Labour get out of this hole?
I mean, they've got to deliver. frankly, if people feel poorer at the end of the parliament, they're out. It's a famous quip that obviously oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. And whilst we're talking about sort of all the specifics that have happened in this year, as we keep saying, no one's going to remember the specifics. But what they will remember is, weren't there a bunch of U-turns that year? And weren't there a bunch of tax rises that year? Those general themes, if people feel that this is a divided government, a government that doesn't have a clear direction, that doesn't know its own mind, and ends up taxing everyone more as a result, that's a toxic combination.
Joe Timett, to you finally, what do voters want the government to do in the next 4 years to come out of this slough of despond?
Well, they want growth. They want the cost of living to come down, and they want their economic situation to improve. I think that Labour has to be consistent on delivery, as Tom quite rightly says, but they also have to not get too caught up with Nigel Farage. You can't out-Farage Farage. There are very important elections in Scotland and Wales and other parts of the country next May. And so it's all very well saying it's 3 years until the general election starts, but actually, very important elections next May, and Reform could do very well. Overcompensating for that could derail plans for the general election more widely.
Joe Twyman from Delta Pearl, Tom Harwood, of course, from GB News. Thank you both for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So with all this chat about Labour and who is in government, I was struck by a poll from More in Common this week, which found that a new left-wing party led by Jeremy Corbyn could attract maybe 10% of voters' support and pose a fresh challenge to Sir Keir Starmer. Under this model, Labour's share of the vote would drop from its current 23% to 20%, the Greens would fall from 9% to 5%, and the SNP from 1% down 1% to 2%. The point there being the main parties would see support on the left leach away to this new party. It's a tantalising prospect. Is Labour about to feel the jolt of competition from its left-wing flank in the same way the Tories have done from its right, from Nigel Farage's Reform UK? I'm joined now by Andrew Murray, a former senior aide in Unite, the union, when he was a big backer of the Labour Party, and now the political editor at the Morning Star newspaper. Andrew, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. You've been around longer than I have, and I've been around a while in politics. You were in the Morning Star lobby team back in the 70s.
Yes, I was in the press gallery in the Commons the day the Labour government fell in 1979 on a vote of confidence by one vote. That was history being made.
You're getting younger. You don't look as though you're that old. So it's you've been.
I was a very young lobby correspondent at the time.
This is interesting, I think, this talk of this left-wing Labour Party. You live and breathe this whole world. Of course, you actually do work for the Morning Star as well, again. Does Labour, you think, does the left, I should say, need a left-wing version of what Reform UK have done to the right?
Well, there is definitely a gap there. If we remember that in 2017, Jeremy Corbyn, as leader of the Labour Party, was not far off winning the general election. And in that election, he secured 3 million more votes than Keir Starmer did last year for Labour. Keir Starmer did better in terms of seats, absolutely, clearly.
Because the way the system worked.
Because of the way the system works. But he was only elected with 34% of the vote, or thereabouts. Labour got 40% in 2017 on a much more consistently left-wing policy offering. So that illustrates the potential and the gap. And if one adds in that Keir Starmer has really been pretty ruthless towards the left throughout his leadership, both as leader of the opposition and as Prime Minister. He's not been tolerant of dissent, and he's famously abandoned all the pledges on which he won the Labour Party leadership in 2020. So he has created that space. And millions of people in this country are frustrated about the state of the country, about how it's being run. That has led to the Tory vote collapsing towards reform. There's similar huge numbers of people who regard themselves as progressive and on the left looking for something different.
That's right, because he's used, hasn't he, Jeremy Corbyn, by chucking him out of the party to show visibly that his party, Labour Party, has changed. And leaves him homeless. Now, you reported this week in the Morning Star, discussions about launching a party have been going on for months, you say. it would have at its parliamentary core Corbyn and the 4 pro-Gaza independent MPs elected last year.
That's right. I mean, discussions have been going on for a long time. I mean, since, as I say, Keir Starmer kicked Jeremy Corbyn out of the Labour Party, they were sort of turbocharged by his response to the crisis in Gaza, where he condoned Israel cutting off supplies of food and water, and that deeply alienated.
That LBC interview, wasn't it?
Yeah, LBC interview in October.
Which I think he retracted after a while. But
took him 9 days, and by that point, the damage is done. If a week is a long time in politics, as Harold Wilson said.
Gaza, it's
9 days.
Well, but any water is a long time.
I mean, so he then turbocharged that opposition. There wasn't time for it to coalesce in any particular form before the general election. But, of course, Jeremy Corbyn got re-elected in Islington North, and 4...
Against Labour.
4 pro-Gaza independents got elected with him across the country, including in towns like Blackburn and Dewsbury that are identified as a sort of left-behind communities where elsewhere reform has been prospering. Others came very close. A remarkable woman called Leanne Mohammed in Ilford North came within 500 votes of defeating Wes Streeting, who I think would be toast if another election was held tomorrow. Since the general election, of course, these discussions have intensified as to what to do, how to build on this, and I have to say the Labour government has only made it easier in terms of the
vote this week.
Won
the vote this week and benefits. But let's just try to stay focused on this idea. Does Jeremy Corbyn want to be a leader again? He was badly burned through 2 elections.
Well, I don't want to be speaking for Jeremy. I mean, he
what did his friends say?
He's held in enormous affection across the left. He's by far the best known figure on the left in the country, name recognition. But at the same time, he had that long experience of leadership, which would have been bruising for anyone. And in the end, I mean, you get to the point where you also have to consider a new generation, new people coming through.
He did, though, say at a rally in Liverpool, you reported, this is Jeremy Corbyn's word, I am determined there will be, in a short time, a strong alternative democratic socialist left-wing voice that brings people together. So he got the idea.
He is up for it. He's made that clear publicly now. I quoted the Liverpool example. He's made similar remarks in other places.
Was that recently?
What
was that rally in Liverpool?
3 weeks ago now, maybe. So it is recently. I think his support for the idea has hardened up. I mean, as I say, he has to speak for himself. But when he is speaking for himself, he's saying he thinks the time has come.
And what could it be called? There were 2 ideas. The collective, I think, was one idea, and a different idea.
Well, different names have been bandied around. Arise was one that was mentioned recently. I don't think there's been any conclusion to that. And also, if you are setting up a new party, you need to create the space for the members to make decisions like that in the end. I mean, one difference definitely will be with Reform, which I don't know what the position is now, but for a long time it was actually owned by Nigel Farage. Yes. Any new party of the left will not be owned by Jeremy Corbyn or anyone else.
That's far too capitalist. The reason why he owned it, there were 15 shares in Reform UK when it started. He was just sick of people causing trouble in the party. I'm going to own the bloody thing, I think is what he thought. Of course, that's completely inappropriate when you get a party with the scale of it now.
Yeah.
We're told, and we think it's changed. But
I'm not interested in politicising with Reform by proxy.
But the point is right.
My point is that any new party of the left would have to be a democratic.
It could be called Momentum. I mean, that's a good name. Is that part of Labour now, or is it not part of Labour?
Well, I think that's still part of Labour. That is still fighting the good fight within the Labour Party. And they will have been encouraged, Momentum and the left in the Labour Party, by the scale of the resistance, which has effectively gutted Keir Starmer's welfare bill.
So the other MPs in it is Zara Sultana, John McDonnell, suspended Labour MPs?
Well, those two and Afsana Begum are the 3. I mean, 7 were suspended for
3 came back
for voting against a 2-child benefit cap. 4 had the whip reinstated. I see no sign of the Labour whips moving to reinstate the other 3, Zara, Afsana and John McDonnell. Of course, their own positions. Well, I mean, they will be considering it. If a new party is formed, they will be considering it. But again, they have to speak for themselves.
Yes, wait and see. But if you add in those three to the, you're getting towards as big as the SNP grouping.
Well, yes, and that's a very big if all three were added in, add to the existing five, yes, it'd be very nearly as big as the SNP, bigger than Reform, bigger than the Greens, bigger than Plaid, and bigger than Sinn Féin. Not that they show up.
I guess, indeed they don't. The technical idea, though, in Parliament is if you form a grouping with a name, you then get your share of questions in parliamentary questions once every 6 weeks or so. So you allow the group there to raise their issues on the national stage more easily than being individuals. So collectively, you're more powerful individually.
No, definitely, the parliamentary procedures reward coming together in a group rather than being simply independents. Of course, the four independents and Jeremy himself, the five, were elected as independents. So that so it's a sort of it's a step to then say back to your constituents, I'm now going forward into a new party. But if you do, there are rewards in terms of parliamentary procedure. On the funding, I'm not so sure because that's judged on the time of the election, the general election.
That's the public money, the short money.
Short money, yes. So I think that's not so much it. But in my opinion, if a new party is declared of the left, I think that 10% of the vote would be a floor, not a ceiling. And probably you'll get 100,000 people signing up as paying members in short order.
100,000 members. And where could they get in the polls maybe after 2 years? Which, let's scope it out. Jeremy Corbyn leading a party starting now. Where would you be in 2 years' time? It could be going up above 10%, you think?
Oh, definitely. It could definitely go up above 10%. I wouldn't put a ceiling on it. But what I would say is it changes the calculation completely for the Labour Party, which ever since Starmer became leader, and definitely since they won the general election, it has been focused on a threat from Reform, and therefore that has dictated Labour policy on everything from migration to arms spending and so on. I think the evidence is actually very, very few people saying they were intending to vote Reform or Tory are saying they might consider shifting to Labour. Now you have this very large body of opinion, some of which is already moving to the Greens, a few of which may move to the Liberal Democrats. If there was a party of the left as well, a Democratic Socialist Party occupying that space, I think the Labour Party is in cataclysmic trouble, as the Tories are. The Tories are having to look at the Reform in one direction and the Liberal Democrats in the other. Labour would have to be looking to Tories and Reform here, and the left and Greens there, and that's
extraordinary. So just in numbers, it could halve their poll position. Labour.
Well, the thing is, Chris, I think if you look at, we've got Tory, Labour, Reform, Lib Dem, and then left/Greens. That's five-party politics. And in terms of parliamentary seats, if we move away from share of the vote for a second, almost anything can happen. Five-party politics in England, 6 in Scotland and Wales, if you add in the nationalists that have big support in those two countries. Yes. So really you'd be in a situation where in a large number of constituencies, an MP could get elected with about 30% of the vote in that. And that, all bets are off there. And it's something, when I started out, it was still two and a bit party politics. Now we're talking about five-party politics.
So Labour could drop to maybe 13% from 23? I mean, I don't know.
Probably to go down to that level 15. would be unlikely, but I think it would represent an existential crisis for the Labour Party.
Goodness gracious. And that's why the Greens, I think, we discussed it, are the Greens looking at electing a kind of Jeremy Corbyn figure to run that party? There's a bit of a conflict in the party, it seems. I'm not very good on my Green politics, which is some of the older Green leaders, and then these new sort of left of centre Corbynista type candidate.
Well, that's how Zach Polanski is pitching himself for the leadership of the Greens. I think we know at the beginning of September how that election turns out. I think there's no question that some of those people that voted for Labour in 2017 and to a lesser extent in 2019 under Corbyn's leadership have now moved to supporting the Greens. Places like Bristol, Brighton, it's more long-standing.
Yes,
parts of the big cities are shifting to voting Green. So that's happening already.
So, Andrew Murray, just finally, easy question. Will it happen? What are the odds? Odds on? Is it 70%?
I would say yes, absolutely. It will happen 67%. I would say within the next 3 or 4 months.
Wow. Get ready, folks. That's going to be an extraordinary moment. A reform of the left, a new party led by Jeremy Corbyn. Keir Starmer's problems might be getting more complicated. Thank you, Andrew Murray, for joining me today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Great to see you again, and thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Chris.
Thank you. And thanks to my previous guests, Joe Twyman and Tom Harwood. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Email me, chopper@gbnews.uk. What's your Twitter handle, Andrew?
I don't really tweet.
No, well, that's very sensible. If you enjoyed this show, please do tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere to help other people to find it. Thanks to the great team of GB News colleagues behind the podcast, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh back at Paddington headquarters, and the podcast busy worker bees in the summer collecting pollen, working very hard, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. George is chuckling away behind the camera. Most importantly all, again, thank you for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, and Andrew does, or maybe doesn't, I think he does, catch you during the week on GB News with your latest political stories and updates. And do go to our website for our best reporting, gbnews.com. Until next time, though, me and Andrew Murray. Cheerio!